Welcome to Education 101 with your host, Eric Wolfram. Education 101 is about the amazing education community we have in the greater Spokane area. We highlight the outstanding programs, teachers, supporters, and opportunities of the education community in the Spokane region. Education 101 is brought to you in part by STCU. Here's Eric.
Welcome to Education 101. I'm Eric Wolfram. Excited today to have Deborah Kolkowski from ESD 101 here with me today. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about the whole idea of mindset. So a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. What does that mean? How does it affect our world in education today? And specifically with Deb, who's the regional mathematics coordinator up at ESD 101, how does it affect our teaching of mathematics? So, Deborah, welcome to the show today.
Thanks, Eric.
Good. So let's talk about this idea of mindset. And I think let's start with, some of Carol Dweck's work is where some of this mindset comes from, but then also you've done a lot of work with Joe Bowler out of Stanford and some of the work she's done in mathematics. So let's start by talking about what's mindset, that fixed mindset versus that growth mindset.
So that's a great place to start from. Mindset is more than a buzzword right now. Mm-hmm. However, knowing what it is important. Mindset refers to our belief in our qualities and our characteristics that we hold about ourselves. And there are basically two possible mindsets: a fixed mindset, and from that belief, you believe that what you've got is what you've got, qualities and attributes that you have are set in stone. Who you are is who you are, period.
Right.
And that's not something that you're going to develop. In contrast, a growth mindset is the belief that while we all have different qualities and attributes, those things we can grow and we can learn from where we are. In other words, I might not become a pro golfer someday, but if I want to learn the game of golf, and I'm not a golfer at all, but there would be some reasonable steps that I could do that would give me the ability to perhaps begin playing the game of golf. And then if I want to improve from the hacker status that I believe and I've heard is out there, there are some reasonable steps. I would maybe take some lessons with a golf pro, and I'd spend time. I'd have to put time and effort and energy into developing those skills. So through hard work and making some strategic choices to improve my ability, I can become better at anything.
Right.
Not just academics, but so that work came out of Carol Dweck, who is a psychology professor at Stanford currently. And 40 years ago, she started researching mindset. And 20 years ago, she started publishing the work that she did around mindset. And as that work has become public, the other thing that's happened is our technology has caught up with some of the research that Carol Dweck has done and conducted. And so there's a lot of neuroscience, and we have brain imaging that supports how learning actually happens in the brain.
Right, and that was one of the pieces that definitely was running through my mind of there's got to be that brain research that goes along with this, because if we're talking about that growth mindset and being able to work hard, we're talking about how somebody learns, and there's so much around brains and what the brains are doing at the time of learning that we're starting to know now because of the technology that's out there.
Right. And because we have that imaging that was not available 10 or 20 or 40 years ago, we can actually see what happens as the brain is experiencing different things, and as people set about on tasks, what areas of their brain light up and which areas don't, given different types of tasks. And they've done that research specifically around math. They've done it around many other areas as well, but there has been a focus on some cognitive learning and how the brain reacts.
Can you give another example of, again, the difference between that whole idea of fixed mindset versus growth mindset? I definitely think that growth mindset is, there's almost that self-explanatory that you're open to growth. You're open to being able to to build upon what you already have, however you do that. But sometimes I think when we start to talk about fixed mindset, there's some confusion that happens with that, or maybe not clarity around that. So
I think you've really touched on an important thing. First of all, no human being is completely fixed or growth mindset. We just tend to be more one than the other. Or the other thing that's very, very common is that we have a fixed mindset in certain areas and a growth mindset in other areas. So
I think about that too, and things that we like versus things that maybe we don't want to necessarily take on or really dig into.
Right.
And I think that's one of those areas where math definitely plays a part in that. I think you hear a lot about people saying, "Oh, math was not my subject."
That's right. And interestingly enough, the next time that you hear that, think about how many times you've heard somebody say, I'm not a social studies person. I'm not a science person.
Yep.
I'm not a reading person. It just doesn't happen like it does in math. And so there are terms for that. And we call it math fragile or math damage because there's a huge percentage of people in our country in particular. Those are the studies that I've been involved in and am familiar with, where a huge percentage of our population opts out of math at the first opportunity. And if you question that, the next time you see somebody that's given a math problem and they either don't want to figure the tip at a restaurant or they grab a calculator, they're just uncomfortable thinking about numbers and what we're being asked to do.
Right.
So to really just stop and instead of just calculate, just think about what's going on here and what do I need to figure out.
And it seems also one of those things that again, there's the ability to grow in some of these, but I'm not a math person is almost that
people won't.
that societal running joke, but at the same time, I think their mindset around that mindset is that there's truth to that. I'm scared of math. I want to get away from it. And so I think that's where we start to get into that fixed mindset, isn't it?
It's a huge part of our culture. All you have to do is watch any national television program.
Oh, yeah.
Everything from the Today Show, where the anchors will talk about, that's a math thing.
Yeah.
Or our local news anchors who say, you calculate the math.
That's right.
It's not my thing. So it's very common. So let's go back to Carol Dweck. So she said about trying to help us understand that our brains really do have the ability to grow and learn in every arena that we might choose to. We have to want to. First of all, there has to be a reason, and we have to want to, and then we have to start pursuing some steps that might help us improve in whatever that is, including math. So then the next thing that happened is mathematicians really got involved in her work because they saw an opportunity to perhaps change people's perceptions and their actual math ability, no matter their age.
Right.
And they started looking and trying to promote math as one of those areas that we might be able to change and think about a growth mindset. And that's where Joe Bowler's work really comes into play.
Right. And so with Joe Bowler, Joe's out of Stanford University, right? And she's well known. She's written multiple books about mathematics and mathematical learning, but then also now getting into this idea of combining mathematics and this mindset of you know what, you can actually learn math even though you may be scared of it. And I know you've brought her out to our area a couple times.
To Washington State, actually.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about that.
So I was very fortunate when I came to work at the ESD, and I was afforded the opportunity. I had heard of Jo Boaler's work, and really where her work picks up from Carol Dweck's is she noticed that people were willing to believe in a growth mindset until it came to math. And then when it came to math, people would completely shed a growth mindset and go right back into a fixed mindset where they believed you were either smart in math or you weren't. You were either a math person or you weren't.
Yeah.
And they weren't willing to tackle it. So she set about researching strategies that perhaps might bring math to the forefront of that growth and fixed mindset conversation. And I was afforded the opportunity to go to Southern California and go to a summer institute that she had. And I went with the idea that my goal was to try and bring her back to our area.
Right.
And the stars aligned, and I was able to have a conversation with Jo because she is what we in our region lovingly call the Garth Brooks of math.
That's right.
She is in huge demand. Her work is used worldwide. She is recruited to conferences, and for many reasons. First of all, because of her mathematical mindsets, which combines growth mindsets and math. And also because she's one of the first people who was very proactive in saying it does no good to do this research, publish it in a critically peer-reviewed mathematical journal and have 25 people read it.
Right.
So she does that research, and then she takes her work and writes it for the common classroom teacher, school administrator, parent.
Right.
Anybody interested in math and math education at all, they can read it and really understand the point that she's trying to make.
And I've been able to go to some of those, and you talk about the Garth Brooks of mathematics, and it's pretty funny seeing people interact with her, and she is truly a rock star. So I tell you what, Deb, let's take a little break, and then when we come back from the break, why don't we continue to talk more about what Jo's brought to this region around mathematical mindsets and maybe some of the areas where we've seen that happen in some of our schools. So again, Education 101, we'll be right back after this break. Thanks.
Last year alone, Avista customers saved over 53 million kilowatt hours of energy, enough to power more than 4,000 homes for an entire year. Way to save, everyone. Way to save. Find your way to save at avistautilities.com.
See you tomorrow night, and thanks again for taking care of the painting.
I got this.
Bye.
Weekends are made for painting. Let the experts at Rada Paint take care of you.
Hi. This looks amazing.
Rada Paint, over 80 years of quality, tradition, and trust. Find it in every can.
To find the right home for you, you'll work with your realtor to compare the properties you're interested in, analyze the market, and figure out a reasonable offer price. And now, here you are, ready to make an offer. Yay, you! Here's how it works. First, you'll complete an offer sheet which your realtor will then present to the owner. Sometimes, a nice note to the owner can help your offer stand out. Butter them up. Tell them how much you love their garden, that it reminds you of gardening with your grandmother as a child. Do not mention you're gonna bulldoze it and put in a pool. The owner may accept the offer, reject it, or counter. It's important to be in close contact with your realtor during the negotiation process so any changes can be reviewed. Your realtor is like your consigliere, and that makes you the Don. Once your offer is finally accepted, there are usually some contingencies that must be met in order to keep the contract alive. Inspections are totally common in real estate transactions. They include termite checks, surveys to determine boundaries, appraisals to determine value for lenders, title reviews, and structural inspections. This stuff is mind-numbingly fascinating. But you know what's even more fascinating? Actually getting your new house.
And welcome back to Education 101. Again, I'm your host, Eric Wolfram, and we're talking today with Deborah Kolkowski from ESD 101, our math coordinator up there. We're talking about mindset, and we're talking about how that ties into mathematics. And Deb, right before the break, we talked a little bit about Joe Bowler, the Garth Brooks of the mathematical world, and thinking about some of the work that she's done in our region, and it's pretty unique to our region, really, if we think about the, what she has to offer the mathematical community nationally, worldwide as well. And then she's here working with our teachers, which is pretty special. So can you tell us a little bit about what she's done?
Sure. So after I met Joe in San Diego and recruited her to come to the Spokane area and work with some of our teachers in our region, we were able to get what they called at that time a Stanford affiliate program. And we contracted with Stanford to bring Joe and her colleague, Kathy Williams, who is the co-founder of UCubed, a phenomenal site that they have.
Website.
Totally free to parents, teachers, administrators, anybody who's interested in math. Has research articles and video clips and math tasks for every age, and it's just too much. We could spend a whole show just talking about it. Anyway, she and Kathy came for 6 days and worked with teachers in our region, and that really changed the dynamic in our region of how teachers were viewing mathematics, and kind of got a fire going as these teachers went back to their buildings and their districts. And book studies started happening around Joe's book called Mathematical Mindsets, which continue to be ongoing. And then this past year, we, as an ongoing effort that we have, because the whole notion that you can go to a workshop or a conference and spend the day there and learn something and bring it back to teachers really isn't realistic. There's a ton of research just on that subject alone that it just fails. And in math in particular, because we need teachers to be doing math differently so that students can be doing math differently. And one of the reasons we need that, and it was a colleague of mine actually from the Meade School District, Jeff Crawford, who first coined the phrase answer getting, as far as I know. And we have gone from, teachers have gone from being focused on answer getting to understanding how we get the answer. That doesn't mean the answer isn't important, but what it does mean is just getting the answer isn't enough in today's world.
And that's such a huge change when you think about the way I went through school and math class, and I taught math, so I have a math background. I'm sure you and a lot of us, and I would say a lot of parents, because I think that's one area that we seem to see a little bit of resistance around as we start doing this new math, if you will, is the idea that that's not how I learned it.
Which is true.
But it's new. And again, we talked about, in the beginning, we talked about the brain research that's out there now. And that's why we're starting to see these changes happen, because we know that that's what we were doing. It's answer getting. I like that. But at the same time, understanding is that deeper piece that goes into it.
Correct. And I'll give you a really concrete example. So when you and I went through school, and many other people, we memorized our multiplication facts. And we were actually rewarded. The quicker we could do it, the better we were, the smarter we were thought to be. And what's interesting is memorizing your math facts really doesn't tell a teacher anything about a student's ability to think mathematically and do mathematics. All it does is let the teacher know who can memorize quickly, because you can memorize your math facts, and person after person after person, if you start talking this conversation, particular parents will say, I was that person. I could memorize my math facts, but then math broke down for me at some point. Today, kids learn often, to their parents' frustration. Often they're learning to multiply using arrays and building models of what's happening in math. So it isn't that we don't want kids to have access to that answer, what that answer is, but we want them to understand, for example, when you have 3 and 4 and you're multiplying 3 times 4, we want young mathematicians to understand what 3 is, what 4 is, and what's happening when we multiply, or we add, or we subtract, or we divide.
Right, and I think there's some creativity that lends itself to that as well. I'm reading a book right now that talks about the education system as it was built that we currently know, and it talks about the idea that it was built for factories.
Yes.
Back then, and that was great at that point in time.
But now we have robots doing that work in factories.
Right, and
so
we do, and so and what we need is we need to have the understanding, because that leads us to that creativity to take us to that next step, and that's really what that book's all about. And that's I think as we start to look at math teaching and just keeping with math and learning and mindset, that's that evolution of our practice of teaching and of learning as well.
Well, and it is, and we are tasked in education with preparing students for life beyond the classroom.
Right.
The current phrase is college and career ready, but really what we mean is life beyond the classroom. And there are just countless CEOs and mathematicians and scientists, and it really doesn't matter what field you're in, and they're saying we have got to change because we need problem solvers, we need thinkers. In my work in the past year, it's been interesting to look at the U.S. Department of Labor came out with a statistic that says 65% of the jobs that will be available when an elementary school child today enters the job market, so say a 4th grader, when they enter the job market, 65% of the jobs don't exist today. So what that means for you and I and parents and educators everywhere, it means we're trying to educate kids for things that don't exist. So when you think about it, that means we have to be able to take in information and kind of sort it out in our head and decide what next steps come and problem solve, be able to look at a problem, try something out. If it doesn't work out, persevere. This is where that growth mindset piece comes in.
Absolutely.
Where you honor and you respect mistakes. It doesn't mean we don't want to get to some place where there's not a mistake, but a lot of growth comes out of mistakes. And that ties back in with the brain research and the neuroscience. Our brains actually 2 synapses fire when we make a mistake. And when we get something right, only 1 synapse fires. And when synapses fire, those are connections in our neural pathways that happen, and that's how learning happens in our brains.
Well, and I think that's definitely one of those big areas that I do think from an education point of view we're doing better, and that's building that safe environment for kids to fail and learn from that along the way, to get the answer wrong, and then take a look at the process and kind of figure out, what am I doing with this process?
Right.
And why did I go in that direction, and where throughout this process did I take a misstep?
So one of the challenges, I think, for parents, educators, anybody that's interested in learning at all, is finding that balance between, exploration and mistakes, and then finding the path and making choices that get us to a place where we improve our knowledge base or we're successful in whatever it is that we're undertaking.
Absolutely.
And so, I think that we're making progress. I think there's a lot of ground to still cover.
Right.
It's a huge thing in education. It's a real paradigm shift to think about growth and fixed mindset.
And getting that, getting the system of this size to start to turn, it's like moving that giant ship.
It is.
A little bit. But I think we're doing that, and I think a lot of it, I put a lot of that towards that Joe Buller work, that's been happening since, 2015?
And many other mathematicians as well
Yeah.
that have come on board and see the validity in that and have taken different pieces of the puzzle.
Right.
But clearly, Joe's work has really led the way. When I have conversations with she and Kathy Williams, they're interested in watching Washington State in particular because we have a larger percentage of teachers attending their online classes and going to Stanford. It's not very cheap to go down to some of their workshops and stay in Palo Alto. But we have in Washington a larger percentage of teachers attending those workshops. So part of my work then has become trying to gather the data around who's doing this work, in which districts across our state, and what growth they're seeing in students.
Right, because, and even though we've hosted some of the Joe Buller work here in our ESD region, we've seen people from across the state, haven't
Correct. So Joe's in such demand, it's very difficult to get her to come for a school district, even a very large school district. She prefers to have her reach be a little broader, and she likes teachers collaborating and working collaboratively. She sees, and one of her very bold statements that she made to me was, if we can't have equity for the students until we have equity for the teachers.
Yeah.
So she loves seeing educators work together, small schools, big
And I was going to
schools.
say that's so important for our
New
small
teachers,
rural districts as well.
New teachers, experienced mathematicians, all working together to try and change the face of mathematics in our country.
And that's a big piece, and I think the mindset work that you've brought into the region and that Joe has done has been a huge move towards that. As I kind of start to think about it, and I hear about examples out there as well. I know there was a couple teachers in one of our small districts, a high school teacher, a primary teacher, that the primary teacher had gone through some of the workshops with you and with Joe and Kathy. The high school teacher was a physics teacher and was just kind of sitting there saying, why aren't we just teaching them the algorithm? Just do the algorithm, get the answer, and we move on. It was amazing to sit and just watch the conversation go back and forth between this primary teacher explaining it to this physics teacher, and at the end of the conversation, the physics teacher, that light bulb went on, and she went,
You never know what's going to make the light go on, and
It
they
is.
say, "Oh my gosh!"
Yeah. Well,
finally, the puzzle piece has dropped into place, and
that's
I
right.
get it.
That's right. And so, and I hope that that's where we continue to go in this region for not just the teachers, but our community, our parents, and our kids. So great work bringing Joe in. Thank you so much for being here today, Deb. And so, again, talking mindset, Deb, if people want to reach you at the ESD, I know that your name was up on the screen, but they can reach you. What's your email?
It is D. Kolkowski, KOWALKOWSKI, or check our website. Just search it on the website is probably easier, at ESD101.net.
Wonderful. That's Education 101 for today, talking mindsets. So I hope you enjoy the show, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
Education 101 is produced in Spokane, Washington by SpokaneTalksOnline.com, which is solely responsible for its content. Education 101 is brought to you by our friends at STCU. Ask Eric a question, recommend a guest, and hear this program again online anytime at SpokaneTalksOnline.com.